You know, it's pretty amazing to see like where my company's gone in the last 15 years, starting it from Missoula, Montana, like at the business plan competition. I mean, it's unbelievable, especially like when I go back now and to where most of our company is, and I see like, I meet people that work for me that I've never met before. It's kind of like, it's really amazing. Like, it's just completely mind-blowing, like how it's grown. And you know, it's all started right here.
You shifted manufacturing to Detroit in 2006, before the recession hit the United States. With 6 years under your belt there, the last few quite tumultuous economically, what have you experienced in Detroit, and how has it impacted the company in Montana?
Well, so it's interesting, like a lot of people kind of like, you know, if you ask somebody in Detroit about Montana, they would, you know, kind of be surprised that we all have internet and electricity. It's kind of the same way there. I think a lot of people don't realize how prosperous Detroit is. It's just phenomenal, especially right now. But like in '08, you know, things were a little more dire. And we decided to move there in '06. It was kind of I had an acquaintance who I had met 10 years previous to that, and he owned a manufacturing company in Detroit. And he was looking for products to make, and I was looking for somebody to make products like they do in Detroit at a really high quality level. So in '06, we finally put together a partnership, and it's really, it allowed us to do things that we couldn't do here in Montana. You know, you talk about the technical difficulties, it's multiplied times 100 in Montana. In Detroit, it was really the only place we could go to get the kind of manufacturing we wanted. The coatings, I mean, it's just not done anywhere else in the world. So we almost had to move our manufacturing to Detroit. We could have moved it maybe to Japan or someplace, but obviously no advantage there. So it ended up just a lot of things came together to make that work very well.
How is your company affected by emerging markets and economies like China and India?
Well, sometimes we do really well. In fact, China for a long time was our biggest export market. For 2 years, we absolutely killed it in China. And then we actually did such a good job that they copied everything we do. So, you know, it really isn't that funny, because our sales went from, you know, really, really good sales to basically zero the following order cycle on some of our parts. So.
Could you talk about the copycatting a little bit there and
Sure.
what that means?
Well, there's a couple things. Like we make one of the products we manufacture is aluminum wheels, and what the Chinese government did was they subsidized the aluminum wheel market for 10 years, 17%. So basically, a Chinese company for 10 years could come in and beat an American company, like by nearly 20% right off the bat. And that ended up affecting us because we kind of pride ourselves on making everything in the United States. But what ended up happening was the Chinese basically bought the aluminum wheel market because all the companies here couldn't compete, so they sold all their equipment into China and then became a broker. So now we have to have our wheels made in China. There's literally no place in the US to get it done. And the problem with that is they make like, you know, 10 wheels for us and they make 10 wheels for themselves, even though it's our design, and then they sell them out the back door of the plant. And like when we went to China, we saw our wheels in colors that we don't make and stuff like that. But then on the other products, the products we make here that they copied, it's tough because they copy the Made in USA sticker, they copy the instructions, so we get the technical phone calls on these counterfeit parts. It's really, you know, it's a huge problem. And we have patents in China, we have trademarks in China, and none of that really helps. But on the other hand, there's some things like in Indonesia we do well because the way the taxes work foreign cars are taxed like 50% just for being foreign, and then they're taxed another 50% if they're over 3 liters. But we have some ways, because like one of our products we make is we take a Jeep and we turn it into a pickup truck, but pickup trucks aren't taxed. So we can sell these really expensive, what's really expensive here, we can sell it there for the same price. So sometimes their laws help us, and a lot of times they don't. But yeah, so in 2007, I'll back up a minute. In 2007, somehow we made the decision to really focus on international sales, which was really saved us in 2008, 2009. And I don't know why we did that, like why we put so much emphasis into it in 2007. Like, it made no sense looking back on it, why we did it then, but it happened to work perfect. So we sell, I don't know what the percentage is anymore, but we have like 56 international distributors throughout the world, and they sell their own dealer network. So we pretty much have the whole world covered, anywhere they sell Jeeps anyway.
AEV started as kind of a custom aftermarket operation, and that has changed from the beginning to now. Could you talk a little bit about how it is working with a big company like Chrysler Jeep, and
Sure.
What the positives and negatives have been on that for your company?
Yeah, so almost from the beginning, we started working with Jeep and Chrysler in like building show cars, taking our parts and show, like they would show our cars basically and trying to drum up some interest. But then finally last year we actually got a contract to supply our parts into the factory for like some special edition vehicles, for about 10,000 special edition vehicles. And that's pretty amazing because it's hard for people to understand here because they've probably never been through a car plant, but the plants are so automated and just in time, and everything, like just bringing a bolt into the plant is a huge, huge ordeal that involves hundreds of people. But for a little tiny aftermarket company to get a contract where you're supplying parts into the plant, sequence parts, on time, having done all the airbag validation and all kinds of technical, government type stuff that we had to do. I mean, we have literally books this thick on every single part, documenting everything, and it's unheard of for an aftermarket company to get that kind of deal. And so we did it, and it was a real challenge. We were talking about this earlier. Sometimes that can make and break you because, I think some of those parts we only make like maybe 4,000 a year, and they gave us an order for 10,000 in 4 months. So we had to completely retool, and I think one of those videos showed the robotic welding, and we had to, we went from manual welding to robotic welding. There's a lot of stuff, and so a lot of that programming is actually done here when we do all that.
Very interesting. Now, this is going to take you on a totally different tack. So you sponsor like cross-country, rugged, Jeep teams, right, for competition. And one of the teams you sponsor is called Team Lerner Reyna. It's a cross-country rally team comprised of 2 sisters, Amy Lerner and Tina Reyna. They took 8th place last year in Morocco at a 9-day rugged cross-country challenge. Do women comprise a significant customer base for you? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, they don't and they do. They don't directly, but indirectly, they make a lot of the decisions, or at least a significant portion. So
tread gently there.
So that was an experiment to see how that worked, and it's actually, I think it does. It allows somebody to, who may not be into Jeeps specifically, and we target a lot of our marketing too. We don't do the stuff you think you'd see when you think 4-wheel drive. We try and do it a little artsier and a little more, so even if you're not into it, you'll still appreciate the videos. So we think about that a lot, and even in our part design, we think about that. Like we say, okay, a guy's going to buy this Jeep, and we need it to be very easy for his wife to operate with a bag of groceries in her hand, like certain parts, like maybe the back tire carrier. So women actually are a big part of our thought process when we design cars, because eventually they're going to be using them, and they're the ones who probably, quite frankly, complain if something's not right to their husband, and we don't want it, we call it the pain in the ass factor, and we don't, so it's kind of, we try to minimize that as much as possible.
Excellent.
Big Sky Brewing Company, we started in 1995. It was really three friends, two of whom had been brewing beer for quite a long time, trying to figure out a way to make a living in Missoula, Montana. And we knew more about beer than just about anything else, so we thought that'd be a fun business to be in. And it did take us, we were all three working together in a ski shop in Missoula, and none of us had any real money to speak of. In fact, the other two guys who were much more sales-oriented than I was raised a lot of the funds for getting the brewery going by selling skis. If you sold enough of a certain pair of skis, you get a few hundred, well, you get a free pair. And then they'd sell that free pair. And that would end up getting us enough money to pay the accountants and the attorneys to put together our business plan and whatnot. And so we started in 1995. We were in kind of across the river from downtown Missoula, across from, well, right next to where the baseball diamond is these days. And we didn't have a big enough facility to bottle, so we were keg only for our first 5 or 6 years. Built our plant out across from the airport, and I didn't bring free beer here, but we got free beer in the tap room. If you want to come on out and stop by before you leave town, feel free to swing by the brewery. We built that plant. I've been in there for about 10 years. Hired Craig Bergenheier, CPA of the year, and I think maybe that was a turning point for us. I don't know, but a little hard to hear all those wonderful things being said about Craig here, but we've had a great go ever since then. We've got about 50 employees. We've been able to keep that size very stable. As we've grown, we've been able to add equipment that kicks up our speeds and whatnot, so we haven't had to add a lot of employees. We kind of like the size we are, where you really do know who you're working with, and you get those long-term employees that you can trust and really help a business be strong.
Excellent. Your website shares great company history and quite a tribute to the virtues of strategic and financial planning. What aspects of your strategic planning process have been the most helpful to you over the years, and even the most difficult?
I think one thing that was really good for us was we had three guys that were starting the brewery, and we had very different strengths and weaknesses and personalities. Over the years, one of the founders has left, and we brought on two other folks, or really a core of four of us that make the decisions. But all the way along, we've had that sort of checks and balances. If someone gets an idea, and then there's other people decide, is that a good idea, is that a bad idea, sort of a thing. You have to be a very special individual to always make good decisions. But when you have other people that might have very different viewpoints to bounce ideas off of, that's been really helpful for us. And I think sometimes that's also difficult. If you do have what you think is a great idea and other folks don't agree with you, you have to check your ego. We're pretty much an ego-free brewery, I think. Anybody can have a great idea. You never know where that's going to come from. So I think that's really been a big part of what's been successful for us, is especially since we have brought Craig on board, there is a lot about, does this make sense? Can we pay for it? How long will this pay for itself? That sort of thing. But still, the just general idea generation comes from a group of people, and then everyone's just making sure, will this work for us going forward, and you end up with a consensus.
Excellent. Let's see. Can you discuss your industry in general and your business in particular, and how they're affected by consumer preferences, shifting tastes, and global influences, and how your company stays ahead of that curve?
Sure. Beer, I think in the big picture, is still sort of two faces to the industry. There's the big brewers, and still the vast majority of what they're producing is the sort of the fizzy yellow beer sort of a thing. And there's the craft brewers, where there's just such a huge variety going on out there. And there's the wine drinkers and the hard liquors and whatnot, and we're all kind of competing for that same pie. What we see is that as part of the craft brewing community, it's a great business community to be part of. People are open and talking to each other, so there aren't a lot of secrets, and it's not really trying to keep ahead of things. It's really being true to yourself. I don't know how many businesses out there, regardless of what kind of industry they're in, talks about we do it for what we like. Well, that's kind of what we do. If there are changing tastes going on out there, right now the real hot thing is ciders. Hard ciders are growing leaps and bounds. Hey, I like ciders, but I'm not going to start trying to produce a cider just because that's the hot thing. We kind of stick to our guns. We aren't chasing the biggest growth out there. We're not trying to expand geographically. We've kind of got our territory where we like it. So what we really do is try to make decisions that make sense for us, brew things that make sense for us, and then we let the marketplace sort of decide what's going to happen out there. And what we've seen too, as far as the consumer taste, it does seem like if you look at, again, in the beer category, the vast majority of the growth is in whether it's a craft beer, an imported beer, a beer brewed by the big brewers, but it's got more flavor, something besides sort of the yellow fizzy beers. That's where all the growth is. It's all in people are looking for more flavor. And that's obviously right in our ballpark, so that's really worked well for us.
Excellent. Any designs on a gluten-free beer? For those of us who can't.
We get asked that all the time. It's one of those niches that's too small a niche for us to really fill. Kettle House does it here in town. But our situation is Montana, every state has its own weird, funky little liquor laws. Montana's no different. We are the only brewery in the state that cannot sell you a pint of beer in our tasting rooms. That's why it is free. If you come in, we'll give you a few samples of beer there. But our system is it's large enough for us to produce, bottles and cans and kegs. It's not small enough for us to do a lot of really small batches, and that's what we need to do for something gluten-free or anything. It's really a small niche, as we'd have to be able to brew lots of smaller batches than what we can produce.
So what we do is home health care, which will touch everyone's lives in this room. And I'm emotional after watching the video. So the man you saw in the video in the wheelchair is one of our clients. We have many. We have over 10,000 caregivers in our companies. We're in 10 states, and we have 13 companies. So by August 1st, we'll be in 11 states. We'll have 17 companies. So we're growing very fast. Because there is a huge need for in-home health care, it is less expensive than having someone in a facility. It's also healthier. I think people do better in their homes than they do in a facility. The care that we offer can either be long-term or short-term. So it can be recovery from surgery or an accident, or it can be for a condition that's not going to improve, that will be there forever. The services that are offered can be nursing, physical therapy, they can be lawn care, housekeeping, anything that the consumer needs, we can provide. There are various funding sources for these services. They can be Medicaid, Medicare, private pay, insurance. We have churches, all kinds of different groups that are funding care for people that need care. We basically, you heard a lot in this video about consumer-directed services. There are a lot of different programs, many different programs with different states, different managed care companies. Everyone wants to kind of do it their way, but there are three fairly distinct models. One is traditional, and that's what I call the old-fashioned one. In the olden days, what was available were like nursing services, where people would get scheduled, someone would come in, a nurse would come in, basically a stranger would give someone a bath. And that's kind of the old traditional services. The more emerging programs are the consumer-directed programs, as you saw described in the video. In those instances, the consumer actually chooses their caregivers. And it's sort of a co-employment model. It's sometimes called agency with choice. It's sometimes called hybrid, where they choose their caregivers and we hire them. And they're on our payroll. But they are actually directing the services when they show up for services, and they're working with someone familiar. It's usually a family member or a neighbor or a friend. So that is one model. And the third major model, it's called FEA, and as accountants you might be familiar with different types of payroll services, and this one's called the fiscal vendor agent, which is the most comprehensive of all the payroll services you can offer. In an FEA model, the consumer is the employer. So we perform the service of getting their federal EIN number, and we do not hire the people that they want to work for them. They do, but we provide them with all the paperwork to complete that hiring process and all the training. You know, the W-4s, the I-9s, the entire packet that they need to hire an employee. And then we pay the wages to their employees on their behalf, file the reports, make the tax deposits, and then we bill their payer source to get that money back. So we're fronting that money, and then we get a margin for doing that. So those are kind of the services that our companies offer. And the reason my company is called Consumer Direct Management Solutions is my company is the management company. All the other companies are home health care. And so we provide all the services, IT, human resources, accounting, quality improvement, and that sort of thing. And all of the employees of my company are in Missoula, and there are about 100 people in that company.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
I think it's amazing that we've got so many successful businesses that just seem to fly under the radar of public awareness, but we've got such amazing things happening. Your business philosophy emphasizes the importance of human touch, and your structure appears to be quite decentralized with local offices. As your business has grown from the original Nightingale Nursing nearly 25 years ago and is now approaching 17, could you speak to the role that centralization versus decentralization plays in your processes and some of the technology aspects?
Sure. The reason that we have, and actually this has been a huge discussion in our companies over the years, is decentralization versus centralization of services. We have centralized all of the accounting, management, IT, and HR in one location because we feel like we can do that more efficiently. We are looking for economy of scales. We want to be scalable. We want to be able to serve one client or 25,000 clients or 50,000 clients with one model. And our margins are very thin. Most of our funding currently is Medicaid. And as there are more Medicaid cuts and more Medicare cuts, you know, we have to become more and more efficient. And so we rely heavily on technology. We rely heavily on specialization, which you can probably relate to in public accounting firms, as you have your auditors and your tax people, and you know that's the most efficient way to function. We have specialized people in the management company, and then the home health companies are mostly run by social workers, nurses, mental health professionals, and people that really understand the population that they're serving. And so we have decided to specialize that in Missoula, and then we are sister companies. We're not a holding company with subsidiaries, and so our management company actually bills our home health care companies for the services that we provide them, but they're all owned by the same 3 individuals.
Yeah, so I started a free local print publication in 2009, which this audience is probably very clear on the fact that's a horrible business model, and at a horrible time to do that. It was like print media is dying, advertising is all of the things that it was based on were dying, except for moms. They were being born every day. So at the time it was just me. I always said we. I'm incredibly good at appearing larger than we really are. But I didn't have any money. I was super young. I was super broke. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had a baby and an idea. I had been throwing an event the night before Mother's Day called the Mother's Day Eve Bash that grew from a party of 45 women who wanted a night out the night before Mother's Day to about 500 women a couple years later, and businesses were wanting to sponsor it. And I was like, okay, there's something here. These women need each other. I'm super, super nerdy, and so I had done all this research, and I had trademarked Mother's Day Eve and all of these sort of weird little tics. But I started realizing there was no great way in Missoula for the businesses to reach this audience specifically, and this audience was looking for each other in ways they weren't finding. So it began as a free local print publication. I mustered $400 together, which at the time I was like, oh, I have saved $400 to do something. And all I had enough was to print a rate card, and not even very many rate cards at that. And they came in the mail, and I was like, oh, they're so beautiful. Oh my God, I have to sell something. And I was really scared to sell. It felt like it was, in my mind, sales was conflict, and it was like bad people trying to make you get something you don't want. And I had this vision of sales, but I had this rate card that I had spent $400 on. So I went out and in 6 weeks sold enough ads to do the first issue in the website, launched the first issue Mother's Day Eve of 2009. And within a year, we had the paid subscribers. We started having people, we started distributing at the airport. And people, so it's like us or Sky Mall on the way out of Missoula. So that's where we started getting the like 65-year-old single guys that were like, I read this on the way to Minneapolis, and I cried. And so we had people who wanted us to send them our free local magazine, and for a while I was just like, somebody wants it, and so I'd mail them, and eventually it was like hundreds and hundreds of people. I was like, I don't have the money for this. So we started a subscription program, and it just spread. You know, it wasn't like there were millions of people in Seattle, but it was people all over, and the writers, the content started coming from all over. So really quickly, the only thing local about it was the advertising. And we still distributed free in Missoula, so it never changed the value for the advertisers, but we started getting calls from people who lived in Australia, other places, and they'd be like, I've been reading Mama for years, and I can't wait to come to Montana someday and go to Betty's Divine, and I mean, because they've been reading these ads for all of these years. So apparently it works whether you even know these companies or can go to them at all. Because of the traction, which a lot of came from having these big writers. So mom bloggers are like crazy, powerful. It is like the most powerful people in the United States right now. And big brands know it. You know, these women have figured out personal branding and their value, and they're brand ambassadors. But a lot of them get treated like brand ambassadors. They don't get treated like writers. So they love writing for Mama Load, which has been amazing for us, and that's been a big part of our growth too, is that someone will get published in Mama Load and they'll be so excited to be published in our little local magazine, even though they get, you know, 2 million people that go to their site every day before breakfast. So they spread the word about us, and that's just been a huge part of it as well. If you do wind up watching the other video, just before you do that, I have to make a disclaimer that we often look like it's fun and frivolous, but it's actually everything is very strategic and intentional on the back end, and our public facing is very like, oh, look at us. We just stumbled into this success. It's amazing how exhausting luck is. So I will make that disclaimer in case you did the video, because the video does look totally ridiculous, but there was a lot of thought behind it.
We definitely will watch that video. Before we do, however, let's address some of the topics that you cover. In your spoof pitch video, Fund Me All Night Long, think AC/DC, folks, you are addressing the need for venture capital. How have you assembled a team for taking you from vision to venture capital, and what has been the biggest learning curve for you going from visionary and founder to business owner and executive?
Okay, it's a couple questions. You might have to remind me of the second part. Technically, the video is a spoof pitch for funding, because legally we couldn't, you know, solicit for funding via YouTube. So we convinced our lawyer to be in the video as well, so that we were extra safe. And at the time, we specifically weren't actually looking for venture funding. So our video is legal-ish. And I'm like a CPA's nightmare. You should not have invited me. They're all like, oh my God, this girl is for $400 and yeah. So within that, we still haven't actually taken funding. I am the consummate bootstrapper, and we're at that point where what we do locally has been amazing and has established what we are and what we've done, but our local advertising isn't going to necessarily fund our national growth. Our galactic growth is like, as we like to call it. But continually we're trying to add more value before we get to that point of an equity exchange. And I will bootstrap forever. It is amazing what I can pull off with like a couple $100 here, and there's a grant for that, and I'll work this out that way. I kind of want to invent something called the Scraptitude test, as opposed to an aptitude test, and you put people in an unsolvable maze, and there's like the smart CPA people who are like, this is unsolvable, I will quit participating, and they like go do something else. And then there's like those of us who would like do it forever. And not only would we just keep trying, we'd like blow up some walls, and we'd sell some ads on the places that everyone always got stuck, and then we'd like sell the whole maze. To a bigger company. So the Scraptitude test, I have it. I haven't yet met an obstacle I didn't love eventually.
I'm almost afraid to ask, what advice would you give budding entrepreneurs?
Sleep now. No, my most solid, I don't have a business degree in case you can't tell. But I think what I have is an ability to ask. I think it's really important for entrepreneurs and anybody really to be reflective enough of their self to know what they don't know. Be confident enough to be able to ask for what they don't know. And when they figure out what it is they want, you still have to ask. So it all kind of does come back to being sort of vulnerable, which in truth is actually being really brave.
Wonderful. Would you like to give a little backstory on the company and some opening comments?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I had been living in Montana for about 5-6 years, and I was fishing at Point of the Rocks in the Yellowstone with a friend of mine who was working at an in-plant printer, and he says, yeah, the in-plant is going to shut down, they're going to farm all their work out, so I either need to move somewhere else or find another line of work. And he says, hey, you have a print background and you like starting companies, why don't you start a printing company and I'll come to work for you. And so that was our market research, and then our strategic planning consisted of finding a $500,000 printing press to buy and writing a $25,000 check and finding a place to rent to put it in. And we thought we'd serve the local print market from, we're in Livingston, so from Bozeman to Billings, and had to actually hire 6 people besides the 2 of us to sort of get started, because there's definitely a lot of specialization in printing. And I fortunately hired a saleswoman, but we sort of stalled out in mid-98, so that was fall of 96. We stalled out in mid-98, couldn't really grow anymore. We were at about $80,000, $90,000 a month, and that wasn't really enough to cover the overhead. So my other business, main one at the time, was wholesale automotive chemical supplies in a 5-state area. We had a distributorship. And one day a guy walks in, the guy from Billings walks in, and he says, you guys are my last hope. I've been to every printer in the state. I have this catalog. It's for fly tying supplies, and nobody will print it for me. And we said, why not? He says, because I designed the whole thing in Microsoft Publisher, and they all say they can't take Microsoft Publisher, which at the time no printers took Microsoft Publisher for both cultural and technical reasons. So one of our guys, we needed the work, so one of our guys somehow cracked it. He hacked it. He figured out how to get 4-color processed CMYK out of an RGB file, and we printed this guy's catalog, and we thought that was really good. And the idea dawned on us that there might be a lot of other people like this guy who were not print professionals. They didn't have Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign and Acrobat and PageMaker, but everybody has Microsoft Office on their computer, at least at the time. And so we said, well, how are we going to reach these people? And we thought, well, we'll do a website. At the time, Amazon was under $1 billion, but we certainly were aware of it. All they sold at the time was books, if you can imagine that. And so we said, let's do it like Amazon and make a website. And we wanted to do it in such a way that rather than a shopping cart, because what we do is custom manufacturing. Your business card is unique to you, and it isn't like anybody else's. At least it isn't exactly like anybody else's. So we wanted it to be that it wasn't SKUs, it was instead you go, oh, I'll take this paper. Well, how much will it be if I use this paper? What if it's two-sided? What if it's one-sided? What if it's only black on the back? And you could instantly see your price change. And my webmaster, who was the same guy in the meantime, who talked me into the thing, in the meantime, he'd gone and was barely working for us anymore. He had self-taught at web design, and he's really good. He says, well, you can't really do that. I said, well, sure you can. He goes, well, maybe if you have millions of dollars. But we'd done business cards for a programmer in San Francisco, and we called him up, and he said, yeah, I can design that for you. It's called JavaScript, or I can do the programming that'll make that work. And it's $100 an hour, and I thought, wow. You know, I paid my lawyer $105 an hour at the time, and I think my accountant $35 an hour or something like that. So we went ahead and did it, and we launched March of '99 with one product, which was brochures, and folding was free if you wanted them folded, because it would have cost another $200 to program a charge for folding into the web page. Folding's not free anymore, though. And we got one order the first day, we got no orders the second day, we got 2 orders the third day, and so we connected a line between those dots and figured we'd be a $600 million a year company by 2004, and we weren't and aren't. But in the fall we decided to launch, or in the summer we decided, in the fall we were able to launch a full line of products, and it's been growing ever since. We launch new products pretty much every month. We just launched European sizes. We're in Livingston. All of our employees, except one programmer who was with us for 7 years, and then he moved to San Diego, but we keep him on, are in Livingston. We sell 5% of what we sell is in the state of Montana, and the rest is outside, primarily US and Canada, but we do ship overseas a little bit. And we have 150 people, and we put about $7 million of payroll into Park and Gallatin counties last year, which we're happy to do.
Excellent, thank you. It's clear on your website that while you are a global printing company, your real product is the service. And you are in a video that we didn't show, but in there you quote, if a human touches the printing product, it should be to add value. If value is not added, then technology should be applied to reduce or eliminate the human contact. What tools or processes do you utilize to recognize when an efficiency can be gained or when it was lost? And how do you avoid or correct the because that's the way we do it trap?
So I'm going to challenge Elke to the Scraptitude test here. Yeah. In about 2000, we realized that there was a lot of paper flying around. So we had this website, but the way orders actually came in was as a picture sort of a job ticket. There's a traditional way you have a job ticket in a print shop, and it says who the customer is, what they're paying, what they're getting, what paper it's on, how many, blah, blah, blah. And we were hoping to scale, and so we thought, well, to get to, say, a $100 million a year company, we'd have to do 700 orders a day, and there was no way it was going to work with paper. And it wasn't even really working that well at the time. Customer would call up, and we didn't know where their job was, and we had to do the safari, run through the little rabbit warren and see if you could locate the job, and then call them back and write their phone number down. And so we wanted to make a whole digital workflow of the manufacturing from order entry to when it ships and FedEx and everything. And we got both Oracle and Microsoft to come in and give us a quote, which included their licensing of their database software and that sort of thing, as well as the custom programming of the application would work for us. And we had a list of status points. So job first comes to this, then the proof's posted, then it's approved, and it goes right on through. And they each somehow quoted right about $1 million. And not having a spare $1 million, we thought, well, we'll do a data definition exercise, and we'll just sort of make a play one. And we did it we started doing Microsoft Access. We actually switched to SQL very quickly. And we just played around with it. We went live in May of '01, still thinking this is just an experiment. And fortunately, it was in a real database program. And now we have about a 10-person programming department. It grew over the years. And so we apply software to the things that machines are really good at. And machines are really good at remembering stuff and transferring information and that sort of thing. Everybody in the company has a dashboard that they work off of, and they only see the things on their dashboard that are appropriate for them at that time. So once they post a proof, it disappears off their dashboard. Once you have a question or a comment or an approval for it, it pops back up, and we whack the credit card, and then it instantly shows up back in manufacturing, and they know what to do with it. We eliminated scheduling. We let the press operators pick what jobs they want to do. We just trained them on how to make those decisions. And we're a big lean shop. We really like lean manufacturing. I have been through an auto plant. I went through Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky. It was phenomenal. It's unbelievable. And in that plant, went through it about 3 years ago. They've been there in Georgetown since 1986, and it was at the time built the state-of-the-art Toyota plant. It had 50 years of experience and wisdom put into it. And they do little lean process improvements, regular, it can be as small as a very little ergonomic change in the way you reach for something, to as big as they put the car together, then they take the doors off and put them up top, and the doors follow the car down the assembly line so they don't get wrecked and don't have to be opened and closed. But in the year before we were there, in that one plant, they made 23,000 completed process improvements. And it becomes a culture where you get the entire company, the definition is people using a consistent problem-solving methodology, improving the work they do. So we try to have it all be bottoms up. We have whiteboards. People say, hey, this stinks, or we don't like this, or we don't like that, and somebody will go to work on it.
Excellent. Continuous improvement. So that statement kind of captures a pragmatic philosophy focused more on the bottom line and being efficient, but it almost must foster a sense of purpose and value among your employees to keep their work interesting and value added. Your company has a warm, relaxed, lifestyle-oriented corporate culture. How does your corporate culture translate to corporate success?
It was actually in the video. We hire really nice people. I think, we may or may not get to your questions about doing business in Montana and the pluses and minuses of it. One big plus is if getting rich is the most important thing to you, then you wouldn't either stay in Montana if you're from here or come here if you're from somewhere else. There's a lot better places just to stack up the Benjamins than Montana. But what we do find is it's sort of a filtering device. People want to be here because they enjoy the environment. They want a great place to raise their families, no pollution, no crime, that sort of thing, great recreational opportunities. And what we find is we get really nice people and smart people and people who actually want work-life balance to look like they'll work their tails off. We have hardworking people, but really almost nobody works more than about 45 hours, and then they're out and they go and they play and they have fun. And I think that it translates into great customer service, because printing is a really brutally competitive industry, and the margins are low, so you have to have people who are willing to work hard and be productive. And also, we get 100 new inbound leads a day from our website, where it's the first time someone has touched us. Most of them phone calls, but also emails and other things. And we turn, a good, happy, engaged, experienced person will have a 40% conversion rate into a customer. People who are maybe going through some tough times in their personal life, or they're a little disgruntled or not engaged, they'll be down at 20%. So happy people is a very important financial metric for us.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, we'll touch on some general panel-wide questions now. So this is for everybody, and answer this if you want. No, not everybody has to answer it, but let's be open and do it if you want. Looking back on the birth and growth of your company, do you see a pivotal moment that finally made success possible? And if so, tell us about it. And if not, to what do you actually attribute your success?
Would you like to start? Last summer, we started getting some really good press. We got Lisa Stone, who's the CEO of BlogHer, which, if you don't know, is a network of women's blogs that reaches 50 million women every month. She's actually a 1984 graduate of Hellgate High School, the CEO of BlogHer. She's a really big deal, and I don't know why we don't like have a sign here, but she's amazing. She wrote an article about us, calling us America's Best Parenting Magazine, on the day they were announcing their keynote speakers for their big event, and their keynote speakers were Barack Obama, Martha Stewart, and Katie Couric. So there was that article, and then there was this one about Mama Load. so we had that, this video, which actually wasn't really made for public consumption. It was made to get one person's specific attention, and he tends to put out music videos as a joke. So we got his attention, and he did a bunch of stuff about it. So all of a sudden we started really seeing the doors opening to the bigger world. And so recognizing that was coming and that we were really needing to put on an on-purpose national face, I got a business partner in November, and she's amazing. And I think for me that was a huge point of the business, not only growing up, but also really committing to it. Because it's one thing to like kind of scrap along yourself and be like, okay, well I just won't pay myself for a little bit. But it's another thing to have other people. I always paid my writers and my employees, but it was another thing to have a business partner, you know, and I don't know, it kind of held my feet to the fire in a way that wasn't there before.
Well, so I started, when I handed my business plan into First Security Bank, I started with a $35,000 loan, which at the time I had no idea how I'd ever repay that. It seemed like the most amount of money I'd ever thought of. But then, so in the early days it was really easy to take risks, and I kind of treaded water for a long time, just little growth, little successes here and there. And I did that for about a decade, and it got to the point where I was making a pretty decent living, and I could have gone on like that forever. But then I had decided if I was going to try and really make something of it and make it big, I would, I'd have to partner up with this guy that I met in Detroit. And that was a huge risk because it's like, okay, things are going well. I'm making a great living. I'm living in Montana, like pretty much perfect. And, I could, but it was a huge risk. But that was the kind of the pivotal point for us when it was like, we took it from a, whatever, 3-person company with an average age of 23 to a real company with, people making 6 figures, it was a crazy time there for about 4 years, and it's still going amazing. But that was definitely the pivotal time for us, is when we decided to move manufacturing.
Really obvious, but for us it was what really got us going, was hitting that break-even point. I mean, as a brewery, we have a lot of money invested in equipment and whatnot. We're a 3-person operation. I did the brewing, we all got together, we had to keg, that was like our team building exercise. Around this work. But the other 2 guys were primarily doing sales work and whatever else had to be done around the brewery. But for the first year and a half, a lot of their work was selling stock. So we worked at a ski shop, we didn't have any money, we got a SBA loan, and we had to raise capital through investors. So until we got to the point where we were actually making enough to pay the bills, it was a really stressful time for us. And once we got to that point, it was now time to say, okay, we know we can just stay here and at least make livings. Now we can look at really growing our business. And the second thing was, our original brewery was draft only. We knew we had to get ourselves into bottles and eventually into cans. So that was another big thing. We had to sell more stock, get more loans, so we had to build a big enough facility to allow us to do that. And that was a big thing because we finally had control over everything, did everything ourselves in Missoula. And so when we got to that point, that was our second really big step along the way.
Excellent, thanks. We'll shift to technology. What are key changes in technology that are currently impacting your business, either positively or negatively, and how do you leverage or mitigate those changes? And perhaps a follow-up to that would be, how do you see technology impacting your business in the next 5 to 10 years or longer?
For us, doing the research and development here, it's huge because, where we used to actually have to make a prototype part and kind of mess with it, now virtually everything we do is in the computer. So we receive the vehicle data from Chrysler, and we basically build parts in the computer, and we re-engineer parts, and we keep making changes in the parts. And then, then we'll send it off to a place, some other state where we'll have something 3D printed, and we'll get a model back, the next day, and make more changes in the computer. And then eventually, when we're done, then we can just digitally transfer that data to Michigan, where they'll make the parts for us, the actual parts and the stamping dies and all the tooling, and set up robot paths. And then we'll get parts back, and and then we prove them, we test them, and then digitally we sign them off, and then they start producing them, in a totally different state. And so it's the 3D printing has actually been a huge help to us in a lot of our parts.
Excellent.
So,
Andrew?
you know, similar to Elke, our business model wouldn't even exist without the internet and without pretty ubiquitous broadband, because we're getting from our customers sometimes very, very large files, you know, hundreds of megabyte files for a multi-page catalog, that sort of thing. And you know, early on, we would have people on dial-up, and it was kind of slow. So the whole business model is enabled. But in another way, you know, there's a lot of people who want to be in the marketing business. It seems really nice, no measurable deliverables and that sort of thing. And what that sometimes looks like, though, print is still a really important component, and it still ROIs for most advertisers really well, because spam had its period that it really worked, and now it just sort of doesn't. And so what we're finding now is we have kind of strategic partners who build some sort of a web portal to let, you know, whatever it might be, to let affinity groups, you know, maybe Lakers fans or something like that, gets their little Lakers thing with their name on it or whatever. So they'll build a whole front end, but they don't have manufacturing capabilities. And so we'll use various web services to let their computers take the orders and come into our computers, and we manufacture and we ship out under their name. So it's sort of our white label operation, which is not high touch. All the high touch is on the technology side and getting our technology to integrate with theirs and to make everything work. But there's not much human touch till it gets to manufacturing. And the print industry has had a revolution in technology in the last 10 or 15 years. When we bought our first press in '96, doing a make-ready, which means putting 4 plates on and getting sheets through and getting it up to color and getting it right, and then beginning your run, took an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, and a really highly skilled operator. And our newest press has a camera that reads the information on the sheet, every single sheet, and adjusts the color every 10 sheets. So you have rock solid color, no variation, and the make-readies are down to about 7 minutes.
What did CPAs you worked with do that helped you? And looking back, what could they have done but didn't that you needed? Does anyone like to start us out on that?
We were fortunate that when we got started, I think I might have mentioned we started right away. We basically looked in the yellow pages and saw who was sort of the head, or talked to locals, who was the best or best known legal firm, the best known CPA firm. And we got to meet one way or another certain heads, and the first thing they did was said, yeah, here's my assistant. And the assistant we were working with was Craig Bergenheyer at Volusia against Volusia, and it was Shane Benada at Borden, Thane, and Haynes. They both have become great leaders in Montana. And so from the get-go, what I remember with Craig before he actually joined us at the brewery was, like so many small businesses, we were on QuickBooks. And I remember our numbers kept changing. Our year end would not be the same in January as it was in March. So he finally really worked on us to get those numbers right and lock them in. And then when he joined us, he got a lot more about how things work. But even as sort of early on in the business, having a CPA that's there to just sort of tell us guys that have ideas but don't have business backgrounds, ways that make sense to us so we can actually understand why what we're doing is wrong and fix them along the way, that was really helpful to us.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll give a little tribute. You know, we currently use AZ and we love them and they're great. My first accountant, the locksmith in town, said, "Oh, I got a great small business accountant." And it was Paul Furtak, who's since passed on in Bozeman. And he was really marvelous to us, and I got 2 good stories. One is, one day I was asking him about something, I kind of ventured into the legal. He says, "Why don't I refer you to a tax attorney in Bozeman?" And I did, and when I talked to that tax attorney, he said, "Oh yeah, I know about your business." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Well, whenever Paul needs some help on something that gets kind of thorny, he comes and talks to me about it." And I said, "Well, he never bills me for that." He goes, "Well, that's unusual." So I asked Paul about it. He says, "I figure if I don't know something, you shouldn't have to pay for my education." And I thought that was just amazing and ethical and that sort of thing. And he's also the one in the prior business where we had a really big growth year. And he calls me up and he says, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You have to write a check for $80,000 for taxes," because we were sub-S. And I said, "That can't possibly be. We didn't, you know, throw off really very much money. I took a nice paycheck, but that was it." And he's the one who explained to me that receivables and inventory count as profits, even though you don't have them. And, and that growth costs a lot of money, and part of that money is paying taxes on it. So that was the beginning of my education on cash flow.
Excellent. All right, anyone else care to address that
I
question?
would second just the education component. Like, I think that it's a really important thing, because I think a lot of entrepreneurial type people see the things they need to do for their accounting or their taxes or their CPA as these sort of tasks. And I think really the relationships that we have built with good CPAs or good financial friends that have given a lot of advice is that it actually really is like as close to a crystal ball as you can get, and that it's actually this opportunity and a tool. And I think getting that mentality shift is a huge selling point as a CPA, but also a huge service. Mm-hmm. That you're not like, oh, you have to do this, otherwise this will happen, but more like, you really want to do this.
I just want to add one more thing, and that's just showing an interest in the business really makes the business people want to work with you, whether it's a CPA or any other outsider that comes in. If you feel like they actually know something about your business, they know who the people are, they know what your products are, things like that, it makes for a much more likely for a long-term, I think, relationship to exist. If you just feel like you're one of their 26 clients and you're there Tuesday at 2 p.m. and that's all there is to it, you don't feel like you want to keep working with that person. I mean, we've been working with Craig since 1993, so 20 years, and that's been really helpful to us.
Excellent.
I was going to add too, for us, it's like the reports that are generated. It's funny because it helps me as an R&D guy. It helps me because I can now look at something and see instantly like where the trends are in our business, like what's selling, what's not, what needs to be pushed, and whether it's in marketing, they can look at that so much easier when it's really good, well thought out reports. And we generate those internally for the most part, but our CPAs go over a lot of them. And it's the difference between, because we had a really bad CPA at one point, and it was, you didn't see that, and I didn't know the difference. But then later on, it makes all the difference, being able to see ahead, like what you're saying,
Yeah.
and just even from a product development side, it's huge.
I think small businesses are often scared, and CPAs have an opportunity to come in and either make it scarier or come in and say, I can help you not feel scared. And I think if you just said that to small businesses, they would come flocking to you. They'd be like, okay, make me not feel scared, Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we have a question here, and this will kind of bring it on home for us. We're a little bit over time, but what are the disadvantages, and I'll add advantages, of headquartering a business in Montana as opposed to another state? And that'll be our closing comments for the day.
I'll go quickly. One of the disadvantages, I'll say first, and then I'll close with advantages, for us is the cost of travel, because we're in so many states, and we bring all our managers in twice a year for meetings, and because our management centralized, our IT department has to travel out to our offices, our HR department has to travel out, and it's very expensive for us. The advantages, two advantages that I'll mention, the labor pool is fabulous. We have highly educated people, it's a healthy lifestyle here, so we have healthy people, and I mean emotionally healthy people that, just like Andrew said, are just great to work with. So we're just very pleased with that. And also, when we go out in the world and venture into new states, it's interesting that Montana has a very positive bias. I mean, when we say we're headquartered in Montana, it's very positive out there in terms of healthy lifestyle and credibility, honesty. We have a great image in the United States. So,
thank you, Cindy. That's excellent. Well, that wraps it up for today's panel. It's now a little bit after 3:15. We are ramping up now for the big gala tonight, so everybody go home and get your party duds on.